What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm back with another episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. And with me, as usual, Chris Fedor coming to us from San Francisco. And we were talking a little bit before we got on the pod about how it's San Francisco. You should be enjoying sunshine and all the nice weather and these kinds of things, but it's gloomy. It's not warm enough to go into the pool. No pool time for Chris or the Cavs. Um, I feel like coming from Cleveland, you would think 50 degrees and up is a plus, but it's been kind of the same weather here, Chris.
Oh, I don't like hearing that. That's a bummer. I was supposed to be able to rub it in that I'm in San Francisco, and then I'm going to Los Angeles, and then I'm going to Dallas, and it's going to be warmer in these places while you have to deal with the cold back home in Cleveland. And I can't even say that. I was walking around earlier today, and I left my hotel earlier this morning to go to Cavs practice, and I didn't even bring a jacket with me. And while I was outside just talking on the phone and waiting for the Cavs to get done with all of their stuff, I was cold. I was in a hoodie and sweatpants, and I was cold. So I went back. I was going to go straight to lunch from there. I went back to my hotel to get a jacket because I'm such a sissy when it comes to cold weather. There are these other people here in San Francisco. They're just walking around in shorts and a t-shirt and stuff like that. And I've got a hoodie, sweatpants, and a jacket on because this is not what I expected the weather to be like. And I'm a little bit of a sissy when it comes to cold weather, and I was cold out there today.
I mean, Chris, today's high in Cleveland was 58 degrees. So
That's ridiculous. It felt like 50, according to my weather app, here in Palo Alto, it felt like 54 degrees.
I mean,
So it was
it was
warmer
raining
there
here.
where you are.
Yeah, it was raining here, so the temperature was fluctuating and things of that nature. But 58 degrees, Cleveland, December, not bad. I'll
No,
take it.
man, I was gonna walk to Stanford University, which is very close to my hotel. It's probably about a 30-minute walk, and I was like, I don't really want to do this on a day like today because it started raining and it was gloomy and it was windy. And I was like, do I really want to walk a half hour there and a half hour back? Or maybe I can just wait until tomorrow after shoot around and see if there's enough time to do it tomorrow. So I'm hoping that the weather is going to be a little bit nicer tomorrow to go walk around the Stanford campus.
Well, I hope for the best for you, Chris. But
Thank you.
as we know, the
It's
Cavs
always about
also.
me. That's how this goes.
Yeah, sometimes it has to be, right? That's
Yeah.
why it's called our podcast, right?
There you go. All right.
But thinking about what the Cavs are also enduring when it comes to a little bit of a funky weather situation in San Francisco, they have not been playing funky as of late. They've been playing at the top of the league. They are 27-4. And Chris, running through some of the stats, entering Monday's contest against the Golden State Warriors, the Cavs are number one in the field goal percentage, number one in three-point percentage, number one in effective field goal percentage, number one in true shooting percentage, number one in offensive rating, number two in net rating, and number two in team points per game. This is a team that is hitting on all cylinders, and we talked about it coming off of the last matchup with the Golden State Warriors, where they had just a historic half. 83
Mhm.
41-point lead. And Chris, I want to get into the nuances of this game a little bit later, but when it comes to replicating the success that they had at home against the Warriors, what will the Cavs look to do to have similar success against Golden State on their home floor?
I mean, I think the big thing is move the ball the way that they did on the offensive end and create the kind of chaos that they created the first time that they played against the Warriors. Because if you remember all the conversation after that game, whether it was Steph that was saying it or Draymond Green in the Warriors locker room, it was all about how that was very Warriorsy and how Draymond said that the ball was moving so much and guys were cutting so consistently that their head was spinning on the defensive end of the floor because they just didn't know who was going to get the ball, where guys were going to cut from, when they were going to cut. And I was talking to Kenny Atkinson after practice today. We sat down for a one-on-one for about 30 minutes, and we're going to continue it as this road trip goes on. But one of the things that he said, I just asked him like how he would best describe the offense and like what terminology he likes to use the most. And he said organized chaos. And I think that's what you see from the Cavs. And when you have four guys all scoring at least 20 points, when you have 6, 7 guys in double figures, like what does the defense do? What does the defense try to take away? Who does the defense try to take away? It's a constant conundrum that the Cavs put a defense in. And that's part of the reason why, Evan Mobley continues to get these open shots. But if you're a defense, what do you do? Like, you have to try and take away something. You have to try and give up something. You know what I mean? Like you can't take away everything that the Cavs want to do offensively. They have so many different counters. They have so many different actions. They have so many different secondary actions when the first one is taken away. They have so many different reads and so many different cuts. So it's like you sometimes try and find the best of the bad options that are available to you defensively because sometimes there aren't going to be good options. It's like when you play against Boston, you don't have very many good options on the defensive end of the floor to try and slow them down because they are an elite level offense. Same thing when you're playing against Memphis. Same thing. Um, so you try and find what you think is the best of the bad options, and you go based on that. And if you're a defense, you're like, Evan Mobley shooting a three, like that's got to be better than what else we could give up in this kind of scenario. You know what I mean? So as long as the Cavs continue to operate the way that they have offensively and put opposing defenses like the Golden State Warriors tomorrow in a bind, that's going to be for them the most important thing because that is what is separating them. That is what is making them so special. It's that nobody has an answer for this offense. It's organized chaos, and defenses are constantly, their head is constantly spinning.
You mentioned the passing and how the ball has been humming for the Cavs offense. I mean, they're coming off a game where they had a season high when it comes to assists in
Hmm.
40 against the Utah Jazz. The ball was moving. And Chris, obviously, like you mentioned, talking about Kenny Atkinson and having his conversation in the first concept in the first game against the Golden State Warriors, you could feel there was a little bit more when it came to that
Hmm.
game in his first matchup against his former team, a team that he relishes his experience with. He talks a lot about Steve Kerr. He talks a lot about Ty Lue and his experience with the Clippers. All the different head coaches that he coached under and all the different experiences that he have made him into the coach that he is today. Going into Golden State, first time going there after getting the new gig with the Cleveland Cavaliers. One, do you feel like there's the same kind of sensation for the Cavs team coming off of practice that they want to show out for him? Or and or does it add on to a layer of how he's tried to run this team when it comes to picking pieces from his old coaches and who might he have taken the most from?
Yeah, I don't know if there's one person specifically, Ethan, that he has taken the most from. And I don't know if he would sit there and think about all the different mentors that he has had and say one was more influential than the other, or one was the most influential. But he seems like a mini Steve Kerr. That's what it seems like to me. Um, and there are a lot of elements to the Cavs, both on the court and off the court, that are very Golden Statey. And look, if you're going to replicate or try to replicate or come close to replicating any team of the last 10 years, who wouldn't pick Golden State? Right? I mean, they have been a model franchise. The things that they do, the people that have gone on to success elsewhere, the different coaches that have come off the Steve Kerr tree that have gone on to be successful or gotten head coaching gigs, the joy that they play with, all of those different things, you just feel that with the Cavs. So, yeah, I mean, I think the pace that the Cavs play at is very Golden Statey. The way that they shoot the three and they space the floor, That's very Golden Statey. The cutting that they do, the split actions and stuff like that, the two bigs, Draymond and Kevon Looney, Evan Mobley, Jared Allen, that's very Golden Statey. And one of the things that it feels like Kenny has tried to instill since taking over is just this culture of fun, this culture of looseness. And that doesn't mean that there isn't a business like approach that this team has. And it doesn't mean that there's a lack of maturity from this team. When it's about playing at the highest level and it's about focusing on a game that's coming up, the Cavs understand how to lock in. 27-4 for goodness sakes. You know what I mean? So it's not like the joy and the fun and the looseness has come at a detriment of focus and approach and attention to detail and all those different things. They have found a way to understand and make basketball fun, because at the end of the day, it's a game and it should be fun. They have found a way to blend that with this business like, I'm going to kill you approach on the court sort of thing. You know what I mean? Like, there are times where this team gets up by 20 and they're celebrating things on the sidelines or along the baseline as if it's a 2-point game in the final minute. Those kinds of things to me are very reminiscent of the Golden State Warriors. They will rip your throat out. They will have that killer instinct, but they'll have fun doing it, and they'll celebrate each other's success. And it's so funny because, I got a lot of grief over my time covering the Cavs because of how I talked about the Warriors. And I just talked about them in so much esteem. And one of the things that always stood out to me is that they had all these different Hall of Famers, Ethan, and all of them were willing to do a little bit less for the betterment of the team. All of them were willing to sacrifice a little bit for the betterment of the team. You know what I mean? Kevin Durant was willing to not be the man, and that was somehow looked at as a negative against him. You know what I mean? When really, like, that's what you want your superstar to do. You want your superstar to sacrifice. You want your superstar to empower. You want your superstar to be selfless. And you see those elements from the Cavs as well. Like, Donovan Mitchell has willingly taken a step back to elevate Darius Garland and Evan Mobley specifically. Jared Allen has willingly taken a step back so that there's more room for Evan, so that Evan can flourish. Sometimes Jarrett isn't finishing games. And so, like, Evan becoming the player he is, in some ways, is coming at the expense of Jared Allen, and he's fine with that because it's for the betterment of the team and because it's leading to team success. Those elements feel very Golden State-like to me. So again, like, Kenny's been around some of the greats in basketball history. Talk about Mike D'Antoni, you talk about Coach Bud, Ty Lue, Steve Kerr. So he's not going to sit there and say, yeah, D'Antoni was the most influential or Steve Kerr was the most influential. But the guy, it feels like, in talking to people around the league and, just getting to know Kenny a little bit more, it does feel like Kenny Atkinson is kind of like a mini-me of Steve Kerr.
Yeah, Chris, and I love that aspect of the Cavs. You talk about the dominance, heart wrenching, being able to pull the opposing team's heart out while having fun while doing it. I mean, I wrote about it for cleveland.com earlier this season after the Milwaukee Bucks game. It was, I think, their latest matchup with that team. And my headline literally was Cavs display commitment to championship habits, blending ruthless dominance and joy. Because
Mm-hmm.
the championship habits that they have been able to create are blended with the joy that they've been able to have on the court, off the court together, but also understanding that they had to be different from the team that they were last year. Because last year, we talked about it, they were able to put up 20, 30-point leads, and sometimes those leads would dwindle because they would let teams back in because they were having a little bit too much fun. So there's
Mm-hmm.
seriousness still in the joy that they're having this year. And it's funny that we mentioned that because the last time that the Cavs played the Golden State Warriors, that was the last time it felt like they kind of let a team back in. And Tristan Thompson had to have a little wake up call speech after the game Like, hey, we had a 41-point halftime lead, and they were able to bring it back to a game that was a little bit more competitive for them. 136, 117 at the end of the game is not what you would think when they have a 41-point halftime lead, right?
Mm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
so I think it's interesting that we mentioned how this team is evolving and changing, and especially with Evan Mobley. And two of the most important things and two of the most fun things I think about when it comes to Evan, and you mentioned his 3-point shooting, is the fact that he has already taken more 3-point attempts this season, 20 or 31 games into the season, than he took all last season. He's taken 71 this year, and he took 59 last season. He's made 31 this year, and he just made 22 last year. He's shooting 43.7% from range, and it's something that we talked about already on this podcast. There was a game against the Philadelphia 76ers where Paul George had to decide between Evan Mobley
Yeah.
and Donovan Mitchell. And he chose Donovan, clearly,
Right.
but he said, I'm still going to have to close out on Evan, right? It's an understanding of the respect, and we talk about this a lot when it comes to Isaac Okoro and the reputation that he has as a 3-point shooter. Evan Mobley is already getting the respect around the league where his reputation is you still have to close out on him or he's going to knock it down. And I think the funniest thing about this, Chris, because we talk about the minute allocation, we talk about how Donovan Mitchell has taken a step back to allow Evan Mobley to do his thing, all these different points that we've made at length throughout the year. But according to Basketball Reference, the 2024 NBA MVP award tracker, Donovan Mitchell's not on this list of the top 10.
He's not going to be.
But you know who are on this list?
Yeah.
Evan Mobley, Darius Garland, Jared Allen. All
Mm.
three of them are on this list. Evan Mobley being the top spot for them for the Cleveland Cavaliers at number 7, Darius and Jarrett 9 and 10. Also on this list, Nikola Jokic, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Jason Tatum, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Karl Anthony Towns, Luka Doncic, and Jalen Brunson. But when you talk about what Evan Mobley's growth and evolution has done on the offensive end, it's not going overlooked by anybody in the NBA, and it's being something that is under a microscope this season because everybody knew for the Cavs to take this next step, Evan Mobley
Yeah.
had to be that guy.
So the thing that Donovan is going to continue to run into is that he is going to be measured against old Donovan, right? Right now, Evan Mobley is being measured against early career Evan Mobley, and he is a significantly better player than that guy. He is a different player. He is being used a different kind of way. His numbers are better than old Evan Mobley. So you see an evolution there. You see a jump that he has made into a different kind of category. Darius Garland is back to playing like the all star that he was a couple of years ago. I don't know if he's going to make it in the all star game. There are a lot of guards that are standing between him and that spot. But he's playing to that level, right? So Donovan Mitchell, like he's been in MVP conversations before, and you remember the kinds of numbers that he was putting up and the impact that he was making when he was getting that level of MVP recognition. He's not putting up those same kinds of numbers, but that's by design. He doesn't have to anymore for this team. Like he has, in some ways, traded individual success for team success. And I'm not saying that like Donovan early in his career was hunting stats or he was all focused on himself. He was winning games too, by the way. He was taking every team to the playoffs. So his game translates to winning. But what I'm saying is when you're talking about MVP, there's a certain level of production that you need to see from a guy to even consider him. And Donovan Mitchell is just not going to have the same kinds of numbers. He's not going to have the same nightly impact, or it's not going to appear that he's having the same nightly impact as some of these other guys who are like heliocentric forces. You know what I'm saying? Donovan is splitting it with Darius and splitting it with Evan. And it just becomes a little bit harder. It's the same conversation that voters were having last year with Jason Tatum. They're like, okay, he's the best player on the best team in the NBA, but like, how valuable is he really when he's also playing alongside Kristaps Porzingis and Jaylen Brown and Derek White and Drew Holiday and all these different guys. Like the Celtics as a team are stacked. The Celtics as a team are an elite basketball team. But does that mean that Jason Tatum's the MVP? It's going to be the same thing when it comes to Donovan this year. And he's not going to get the MVP recognition that fans are going to want. I'm telling you right now, they're going to be really, really upset when the MVP voting comes in at the end of the year and they don't see very much of Donovan Mitchell. But a big part of that is because he has willingly shared that spotlight. He has willingly shared that offense. He has willingly shared that level of production with some of these other guys, and elevating Evan, elevating Darius, that is going to benefit the Cavs greatly. The belief is that's going to benefit the Cavs greatly when springtime rolls around, because there's going to be a level of readiness within Evan and within Darius that they just didn't have last year when they got to the playoffs.
And Chris, I feel like people take for granted the wins at all, right? Like the NBA is so hard to win in. And Donovan Mitchell has pushed and elevated this team to win at a basis that hadn't been done since he got here, right? Since he
Mm-hmm.
got here, he has elevated. And we've talked about this before. Donovan Mitchell, on every team he's been on, has brought that team to a different level. And
Yep.
I mentioned this because you look around the league and a lot of things can happen, right? And obviously everybody's got eyes on the Boston Celtics. The Boston Celtics are 5-5 in their last 10 games, and they've lost 3 of their last 4 contests. Those
Mm-hmm.
games coming against the Orlando Magic, without Franz Wagner, without Paolo Banchero, without Moritz Wagner, the Philadelphia 76ers, with like who are still trying to figure themselves out, the Indiana Pacers tonight, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
and mixed in there is also a win against the Philadelphia 70 or a win against the Indiana Pacers on Friday when they dropped
Mm-hmm.
142 points. So
Mm-hmm.
that shows you how things can change in this league when it comes to how different
Oh man,
players being in and out can impact everything.
winning is hard, man. That's the thing. Just enjoy. If you're a Cavs fan, just enjoy it. Don't hit fast forward to the play. Like I totally understand that this team's final judgment is going to come in the postseason, but that doesn't mean that you can't enjoy the ride. That doesn't mean that you can't celebrate individual success or team success in various moments throughout the course of the regular season. You know what I mean? And I don't think there's anybody in that locker room, because they understand just how difficult it is to win games. I just don't think there's anybody in that locker room that's saying, we don't have to bring our best against X team or Y team or Z. You know what I mean? There's just not that mentality. There is a different mentality in that locker room. I asked Darius the other night, and I'm working on a bigger story about their first road trip, their first extended road trip of the season. And I asked everybody, including Darius, I said, what are you most hoping to get out of this? And the answers varied. And Darius just says, wins. And I think part of that is because, like, he knows what losing felt like. I mean, early in his career, that's all he did. So he doesn't want that feeling again. But even Ty Jerome walked by and he was like, really? That's what you're going with here? That's not the answer that he's looking for. He was like, I don't care. I'm just here to win. So I think there's an understanding of just how difficult it is to win any night in the NBA. Like any night you go into a game, you could be susceptible. And that's part of the reason why the Cavs have been so impressive. They haven't had those stinkers. And like, if you want to characterize something as a stinker, think about the teams that they've lost to. By the way, for whatever you felt like they were going to be coming into this year, the Atlanta Hawks are in a battle right now for home court advantage in the first round of the playoffs. Okay? They are above 500. They are right there with the Orlando Magic and the New York Knicks. So, however you felt about Atlanta coming into the year, it may be time to kind of like rethink that. And again, that doesn't mean make a sweeping declaration about their chances of winning a championship or something like that. But understand that if the two quote unquote stinkers that the Cavs have had, that they would probably label stinkers, if they've come against the fifth best team in the Eastern Conference, are they really stinkers? But I think that tells you the mentality that this team has. Like, they didn't play to their own standards. They played what they feel like were two poor games, and they weren't focused on the opponent, and they don't care who it came against. It's like they didn't play up to their own standard, and it led to them losing games. But their only losses are against Atlanta, Miami, and Boston. Like, that's not Detroit. That's not Toronto. That's not Charlotte. That's not Washington. You know what I mean? Like, it just tells you the level that this team has played at consistently. And it's not easy to play at that level consistently.
At all. At all. So whatever like team they're playing, value wins. Like, this is an organization that has taken so long to like love and admire and be able to like take pride in banking wins. Like, the fan base has been waiting for this for so long. So enjoy it, right?
Yep.
Like, the expectation has risen to a different standard. It's at a different level.
Yes.
But
27-4 through the first 31 games is insane. It doesn't matter what kind of schedule they've played against. It doesn't matter who the opponents are on the schedule. It's insane. It does not happen every year. And don't take it for granted, because the Cavs certainly are not.
all right, Chris, I want to move on to potentially our last topic.
Okay.
The guy that the Cavs have had their eye on will not be a Cleveland Cavalier this season. Dorian Finney-Smith headed to the Los Angeles Lakers from the Brooklyn Nets. And he was one of the guys that we've mentioned before that the Cavs liked, right? And what I took away from this trade was the asking price for even role players around the NBA is significant and something
Yeah.
that the Cavs have to take in account when it comes to making any moves in the trade deadline period, right?
Yep.
Two players, a 2-for-2 deal, and then added on 3 second-round picks for Dorian Finney-Smith.
Yeah.
Like, it's a haul for the Brooklyn Nets, who are looking to rebuild, who are looking to do anything they can to get the best lottery pick scenario, all these other things. So, Chris, when it comes to Dorian Finney-Smith and his move to Los Angeles,
Mhm.
what do you think that does for the Cavs, and what do you think it should mean for Cavs fans trying to get an idea of what could happen for the team ahead of the trade deadline?
Well, it makes it tougher for them to meet the asking price of some of these types of players. Dorian Finney-Smith is a very valuable player. What he brings to the table is what a lot of contenders are going to be looking for. So what it means is that there are other contenders that are going to be looking for the same thing that the Cavs are. So that creates a bigger market, and it creates a situation where the asking price can be high for some of these teams because they understand that they're going to get it because those players are in such demand. So what it leads me to believe is that it just makes it more difficult for the Cavs to pull off a trade. Because if that's going to be the asking price, or something similar to that is going to be the asking price, it's going to be hard for the Cavs to meet that. You can sit there and you can say what you want to about D'Angelo Russell, but that's a rotation player for the Los Angeles Lakers that they had to subtract. Now, maybe they were willing to do that. They obviously were willing to do that to beef up a different portion of their roster. But who's the rotation player? We talked about this the other night on the podcast. Who's the rotation player for the Cavs that you're willing to subtract? Because that's what it's going to take. If you're talking about one of these types of players, this caliber, with this kind of contract situation, you're subtracting a rotation player. You're subtracting a player that matters. You're subtracting a player that has mattered to them going 27-4 to this point in time. And it's one thing to be willing to do that, But then it's another thing to find the other ancillary pieces that are going to sweeten a deal. And if Dorian Finney-Smith went for this, just think about what Cam Johnson's going to go for. If Dorian Finney-Smith went for this, and I know that there are different factors in terms of length of contract, in terms of base salary, all that kind of stuff. But in terms of just like the player itself, if Dorian Finney-Smith went for that, what is Cam Johnson going to go for? What is DeAndre Hunter going to go for? What is Jeremy Grant going to go for? Another name that you're probably going to hear in the next couple of weeks. So the thing that the Cavs need the most, or that we believe that they would like to improve the most, is the most in-demand thing in the NBA, with a lot of suitors that are going to compete for the same types of players. And a lot of those suitors have more to offer than what the Cavs do in terms of draft compensation. And look, if you're a team that is a quote-unquote seller, that's what you want. You want expiring contracts for financial flexibility in the future, and you want either young players on controllable contracts, or you want draft capital. In the Cavs, in terms of what's expendable to them, they don't really have a lot of that. So it just makes me feel that it's going to be harder for the Cavs to make a move based on what happened with Dorian Finney-Smith.
Yep. And I think it's just interesting when you talk about roster construction, where the Cavs are at, and luxury tax, and all those different things, because you talk about, like you mentioned, the list of players, especially Cam Johnson and someone else that a lot of Cavs fans want. And I bet if the
Mm-hmm.
Cavs had the money and and the assets to get him, they would love to have him
Yep.
too. But it's just not realistic, right? And it feels like I was reading, scrolling through Twitter as I do, Chris, and found some different information from Brooklyn Nets reporters on how Cam Johnson's salary, as it's marked, I think it's like 22 million next
Mm-hmm.
year. It's actually bumped up to like 27 and a half because of
Mm-hmm.
incentives and all those other things. And those are things that you don't think about surface level that are also included when you have to go through these negotiations. Like, those are numbers that they would have to exceed in asking price when it
Right.
comes to what other teams would have to give up to go get Cam Johnson.
Yep. I
So,
mean, that's the thing. When you talk about these kinds of players with these kinds of contracts and the situation that the Cavs are in, just the starting point in any trade conversation is, all right, how do we make this work legally? So the first thing is you have to find the salary that matches the player that you're trying to achieve here. And we can sit here and we can say, well, 3-team trade. We can sit there and say 4-team trade. Sure. You can always bring in all these other teams, and then you have to float them different things as well. But just surface level, to understand it as much as possible, you have to start with salary matching guys. So if you're interested, if you're a Cavs fan and you're interested, and rightfully so, of course you're interested in DeAndre Hunter. Duh. Like, of course you're interested in Cam Johnson. They would look good for the Cavs. They would help the Cavs. But the starting point is, how do we make this legal? Where does the salary come from? If you're talking between 20 and 25 million, you're talking Max Strus, right? I mean, like, you have to be, or Karis LeVert. Talking about either your starting small forward or your sixth man. That's just the starting point. That's not even talking about, the young player that you would have to throw in there, or the draft capital that you would have to throw in there. Or you're talking about Jared Allen because he makes 20 million. And, in any of those kinds of situations, the starting point is one of your top 6, 7 players in your rotation. That's a tough ask for a team like the Cavs that's playing as well as they are, to give up that has this level of cohesiveness, that has this kind of chemistry on and off the court. Like, that's a tough ask just from the rip. And then you say, okay, what's the draft compensation? Is it a future first round pick? Do we have to go to like some 12-year-old and trade that guy away? We have to go to like some 10-year-old and trade the draft rights of him away? Is it multiple second round picks? Is it 4 second round picks? You know what I'm saying? So it's like these things are complicated, especially in a situation that the Cavs are in for those players, for the move the needle type players. Now you could set your sights a little bit lower, right? There are names out there that continue to get floated around. John Conchar, you want him from the Memphis Grizzlies? He only makes $6 million a year. He's like Dean Wade, basically. He's that type of player. Um, so I just think for the Cavs in the situation that they're in, they're going to have to set their sights a little bit lower, and fans are going to have to look more to the unheralded names as opposed to the flashy ones like Cam Johnson and DeAndre Hunter and Jeremy Grant, even Dorian Finney-Smith. Like the price tag for Dorian Finney-Smith, just looking at what it was after the fact, I don't think the Cavs are in position to do that. I don't think they were in position to trade away either Max Strus, Karis LeVert, and because that's essentially what D'Angelo Russell was in that particular deal, and multiple second round picks.
Yeah, it's interesting. Obviously, we'll get into other names that we feel are more likely or possible. Obviously, the Cavs also still have one roster spot open, so they have that conversation and see where
Mm-hmm.
they can go in the buyout market and all those different things. But to bring this full circle, Chris, 27-4. Right? Like, enjoy it. Enjoy the roster that has gotten them this far. Sure, you think about the playoffs. Sure, you think about who's going to be guarding who and what matchups might be more helpful to have some of these guys off of the trade market. But what is the reality of if you don't have Karis LeVert, who has been phenomenal to start
Yeah.
the season? What what do you do if Max Strus comes back and he's on a heater? He's been playing out of his mind on defense, rebounding, setting up offense, spacing, all the different things that we know about Max Strus. He's done, and he's only been back for what, 2 weeks? So it's just a testament to what this team has been able to do with people on the injury report the entire season, when people are coming back, getting
Mm-hmm.
reacclimated, all those different things. So enjoy the team that they have. Enjoy the camaraderie, the joy, the fight, the dominance that they've been playing with. And that's what we talked about at the beginning of this podcast of how they will rip a team's heart out and stomp on it and then laugh about it on the sidelines, right?
Yep.
That is what should be the most enjoyable part of this team is they are not the same that they were, and they're playing with a different level of enjoyment and a different level of heart than we've seen in the past. But
And it doesn't mean that the roster is perfect, and it doesn't mean that they don't have upgrades that could certainly help them. And it doesn't mean that they should go into this trade deadline saying that we shouldn't be open to various ideas or various additions. You know what I'm saying? Consider everything, listen to the possibilities, see what the cost is. But I'm just trying to make it as realistic as possible for people to understand what's likely for this team, what's possible for this team, and I think if you're sitting here saying like, do they need some help with this roster? Sure, they could use another two-way wing that has more size than the guys that they have. And I'm sure that they're going to continue to look for that, just like they were looking at Dorian Finney-Smith for the last couple of years. But if they don't make a move, it doesn't mean that the season's over. And if they don't make a move, it doesn't mean that they can't compete with some of these other teams. You know what I'm saying? They're in a really, really good place from a financial standpoint, from a roster construction standpoint, from just how they're playing from that standpoint. And yes, they could improve this roster. And yes, there are guys out there that could make them better. But I don't sit here today and say they need to do something to compete in the playoffs. I was having a conversation with a source before this podcast even started, and he was saying that to him, and this is just one person's opinion, but it's a very smart person around the NBA. He said, Chris, if I look at it today, it's one of Cleveland, Oklahoma City, or Boston. That's who's winning the championship this year. That's coming from a smart person outside the organization that has been around the NBA for a very, very long time. Like, that's how there are people in the NBA looking at the Cavs. There are other teams around the NBA saying, you're not doing anything at the trade deadline, are you? Like, they're calling up the Cavs just to try and see what they may do, what they may not do. And the commentary, the feedback that the Cavs are getting from these teams is basically, why are we wasting our time talking to you? Because you're not going to do anything at the trade deadline anyway. Like, why would you? Look at your team, sort of thing. You know what I'm saying? So I just don't think it's a situation where the Cavs, just like this past offseason, they didn't have any reason to go into the offseason saying, we need to shake up this roster. We need to make enhancements from a player personnel standpoint. They didn't feel like that, and they didn't go that direction. They can look at it the same kind of way going into the trade deadline. The Lakers had to make a move. Watch them play. They had to make a move. Some of these other teams you can look at that are quote-unquote underachieving or trying to get to the level that the Cavs have shown that they can get to, that they are on. Some of those teams will have to make moves in order to get to that point, right? The Cavs don't have to. They don't need to go into this trade deadline and act like a desperate team.
And with that being said, that'll wrap up today's episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. But remember to become a Cavs Insider and interact with Chris, me, and Jimmy by subscribing to Subtext. Sign up for a 14-day free trial or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word STOP. It's easy, but we can tell you that the people who sign up stick around, because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from me, Chris, and Jimmy. This isn't just our podcast, it's your podcast, and the only way to have your voice heard is through Subtext. Y'all be safe. We out.